subscribe to our Stock Movers Reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Well, President Donald Trump offered a defiant defense of his policies and economic record, declaring the nation is, quote, back bigger, better, richer, stronger than ever before, end quote, in Tuesday's State of the Union address. Let's take a listen.
The roaring economy is roaring like never before. The Dow Jones broke 50,000 4 years ahead of schedule, and the S&P hit 7,000, where it wasn't supposed to do it for many years, were tariffs. We are doing really well.
All right, that was President Donald Trump last night's State of the Union address here. Let's get a little bit of a post-mortem here from Nathan Dean, senior policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's based down there in D.C. Nathan, what's the thinking down in D.C. About the president's State of the Union address last evening?
So we didn't see a lot of forward-looking ideas. It really was just a recap of what President Trump has been pushing over the last year. And the reason why that's important is because many of us in the policy space, we were waiting for President Trump to come out and say, look, I want Congress to do what's called a reconciliation bill. So think of the one big beautiful bill, but another version of that. So think of healthcare changes, tax cuts, other things like tariff authorities. And he really didn't do that. He sort of touched about it, but he didn't come out and say that he wanted Congress to do this. And with his statement that he just said a couple of weeks ago, where he didn't think he really needed Congress to implement his goals, plus the thin layers of margin in the House of Representatives, makes us very bearish. We're only at a 20% chance that another reconciliation bill can pass this year, which means I think Congress is sort of out of the action for most things until the midterms in November.
Yeah, well, Nathan, of course, the president declared the nation is back bigger, better, richer. That doesn't seem to square with the economic reality for voters on the ground. And how does that, what does that mean, especially when we're heading into midterms and the economic reality is very different from the way that the president characterized it last night?
You just hit the biggest Republican challenge going into the midterms is exactly that. How do you convince the American people that the economic situation is good and that inflation prices are down and that food prices aren't up when a lot of people, at least anecdotally or in their wallets, feel otherwise? And so this is something the Republican Party has to figure out, and it's not going to come from the White House. The White House message is going to remain consistent between now and the midterms because President Trump is just not in his nature to come out and say, look, there's a problem. I mean, he usually comes out and says, look, there is no problem because we're doing great. So I think as we get closer past the primary season, so think past March, April, when Republicans can then go a little bit more towards the center aisle, they don't have to worry about a primary challenge. You're going to see all 435 members of the House of Representatives really run on this idea of affordability. And you're going to start to see ideas from Republicans trying to address this. But like I just said, if it requires an act of Congress, it's most likely not going to happen this year.
From a political perspective, Nathan, I wonder what the smart folks like you in D.C. are thinking here, because affordability is an issue. We saw it with the New Jersey governor election, with the Virginia governor election, and some other smaller elections around the country. Affordability is the big issue. And doubling down on tariffs after the Supreme Court struck them down, that seems to be a tough political game to play. What's the feeling in D.C.?
So, when you think of this idea of the affordability, you want to drive costs down, but then you have this inflationary impact that we would argue related to tariffs, combined with the fact that the prediction markets are saying that the Democrats have an 80% chance of taking the House. And there's even some markets out there saying that the Democrats have a 40% chance of taking both chambers. That gets President Trump closer and closer to that dreaded status of lame duck. And we've seen this time and time again, that presidents in the second administration, as they get closer to this lame duck status, they begin to ignore Congress because political capital just isn't there, and they try and do things on their own, either via deregulation, which takes time. It certainly impacts sectors, but it takes time, or executive action. And so as we get closer and closer to this lame duck status, you're going to see President Trump use the bully pulpit more and more to try and drive corporate behavior. Think of, his statement over the weekend where he tried to push Netflix to kick Susan Rice off the board. That's just going to be more and more evident as we get later and later into his presidency.
All right, Nathan, thanks so much. We appreciate that. Nathan Dean, senior policy analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. His job is to make sense of what's happening down in D.C. for the rest of us.